Hello and welcome to your Wednesday evening weirding session. I'm your host, C. Savory, creator of Fractal Praxis. Welcome. As you can see, I've decided to soften the setting of the weekly talk. Indeed, I'd like to move toward even more of a pose of repose when we talk, inviting in the liminal consciousness that happens when we soften our consciousness, when we allow ourselves to relax and allow our minds to drift in these spaces of receptivity. We may find that this is what helps to unlock new ways of seeing, new ways of assembling the information available to us in ways that make more sense and that free us to live out our more true lives. So, times are wild, and this is a moment of dispatch and discourse. And we might as well be sitting down for it. We might as well be laying down for it. We might as well be touching grass for it. And I definitely recommend that. We need the resourcing that comes from nature in order to do what we must do and navigate these waters. Today, I want to speak very simply and plainly about what it means to do fractal praxis. There's fractal praxis, capital F and P, which, is the brand that I've developed. And then there's lowercase fractal praxis, which is just the work of actually doing the praxis, doing a way of living that is appropriate and adaptive to who and what you really are. And I believe, this has been my own work to arrive at these truths, I believe that who and what you really are is an immaculate expression and extension of life. We may develop a sense of ourselves as an individual human or as part of a community, of a specific culture, a specific origin. And all of that may be true, but it is not the whole story. The whole story is that we are interbeing with all other beings, and that all of the history of the interactions of beings on Earth have created the environment in which we exist and in which we attempt to survive and thrive. And so we are co-constituted by everything. Thich Nhat Hanh speaks of this as the idea of interbeing. The hard, long journey of fractal praxis is to adapt our belief systems, our ways of seeing the world, our understandings and interpretations of the world, to match the truth of things. Because as we all hopefully know, we are flawed sense makers. We are flawed interpreters of information. And so we really do have to work and labor to develop a map of the world, an internal map of the world that accurately helps us navigate the outer world. And this takes time. We all grew up with a certain kind of conditioning, and our work as intelligent beings of agency is to oftentimes unravel a lot of that conditioning, whether that means getting rid of some pet ideas, some, deeply conditioned ideas or not. This is the hard work. And then there's the soft side of all of this, which is just doing what we must, doing the best we can with who we are today, whether or not we have a perfectly developed internal map of the world, right? One that adequately understands and grapples with our interbeing with all things, our place in systems, our place in the environment, our place in our communities, right? That's this more indigenous, place-based relationships and interactions. None of us will ever be perfect in any of that. And no matter where we're at in that journey, we can start right where we're at and we can do something. And so I want to talk about what can we do that begins to make a meaningful intervention in the world. As a lifelong activist, I've always been interested in how to make change, how to make the world a better place, how to confront injustices, things like that. And I have been witness to and been party to a diversity of tactics and strategies over the years trying to make change. And my analysis at this point is that, one of the most effective ways to experience coherence, to experience, right, that freedom from cognitive dissonance, which does come with adopting a more apt worldview and operating from our interbeing as opposed to from more shallow stories of ourselves, such as individuals, we can find meaningful interventions that reflect that reality. Again, regardless of whether we've fully grappled with it internally, we can start to enact and interact with on the basis of that externally. So praxis obviously is right there in the name. There's something important about acting like we are life, that we are fractals of life, and that we serve all life. There's something important about that, right? So fractal praxis is something that can be done. Now let's get into that. How do we do it? What are we doing when we do it? We start with taking responsibility. Because if we are these incredibly sentient, intelligent, sovereign beings hopefully growing toward greater agency, greater regulation in the form of one's wildness, one's wild intelligence and wild spirit regulating how one lives one's life. If we're moving towards that, it involves taking responsibility because we have a lot of power. And so we have to take responsibility for our very existence and our very our contributions, our giving and our taking from this web of life. As a modern human, a lot of the food comes from the grocery store. We get around through gas-powered vehicles. It's often, this lifestyle makes it hard to see our interconnections. And so we have to do some work to actually act as if we are interconnected and to kind of overcome some of the biases built in to a capitalist lifestyle. And so one of the ways that we can do this is by shifting our perspective and reflecting on all of the different scales at which we exist and at which our being interacts with and affects others. Obviously, the most concentrated realm of interactions, the realm where we have the most influence, would be our closest connections, our how we interact with ourselves, how we interact with our intimate relationships, our family, our loved ones, and then going out from there as if concentric circles, going out from your densest, most meaningful interactions, you then have the more kind of superfluous edges of interactions where, when I buy this product in a store, whose lives am I affecting, when I when I use my bicycle to get to the store instead of the car, whose lives am I affecting? This arena is often much more ambiguous, right? Because we're dealing with complex systems and we can scarcely ever know how we're fully affecting something, right? That said, we are affecting everything, right? And we can at least even just superficially, even just for fun, we can adopt the idea that we can do something, that we are doing something, that we are affecting everything, right? And then to operate from that place. So my colleagues at Regenerate Change published this great resource called the Regenerative Changemakers Manual. Check it out if you get a chance. In it, there's some techniques for evaluating how you're doing and how you're showing up in the world, and what your needs are for regenerative thriving, and how you can attend and better resource those needs so that you can show up even more robustly in your other relationships and in your extended relationships. And then once we feel that we are a little bit past survival, it is up to us to think about how we redistribute our resources and how we give back. There is a myth in capitalism that to give what you have to give is putting you in a weak spot. And it's a myth to keep us from entering from re-entering this process of reciprocity. Because the truth is, when we give, and this is something that the author of Braiding Sweetgrass speaks of, when we give, we create abundance in the field that we can then draw from when we really need to. So it's really about communal living, communal, cooperative, mutually beneficial living. And when we think about what it means to live regeneratively, which if we were trying to live as if we are life, then we would be looking for ways to act and live that mirrors the pattern of regenerativity. When we think about what regenerativity is, it's simply about the system's capacity to recreate itself, to replenish itself, where there is more there than there was just from the results of the interaction. So that's really what we're looking for. We're looking to create regenerative action. Now, I have a method that I use which combines some of these ideas from permaculture, from social permaculture, from indigenous lifeways, and is a way of simply looking at, I think of it as prismatic, looking at the full prism of colors of who we are, of the systems that constitute us, and of what our role is to play in all of those. Now, quick caveat, some of us will naturally be inclined to activity or activism at one or more of these scales. Some of us are really, really good caretakers and lovers and healers, and we tend to our direct relationships primarily. Some of us are extremely identified with and concerned with justice on a global scale. So some of us are fighting with our personal time and energy. We're fighting every day for the liberation and the free existence and the health and safety of people across the planet, different people than ourselves, people extended from us, or ecological communities like coral reefs or polar bears, right? Fighting for the justice for those creatures to live out their full lives as well. And some of us might be community organizers, right? Like myself, people looking to activate the potentials of a neighborhood or a community or a collective in achieving self-determination, whether that's through small business, through cooperative organizing, through political organizing. Some of us are working in that domain. So we each will have a preference, and it might be helpful to just take a moment to, do a little loose analysis of where you show up. And if you're noticing that you don't feel very interactive or connected with any of these realms, then there might be the presence of freeze or flight, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. There might be something like that going on where you're not really feeling like you're inhabiting your own life fully. And that simply unfreezing and simply getting help for that experience might be the starting place. But assuming that you have some level of embodiment and groundedness in your life, and you're not surviving, and you're able to share some of your surplus with the world, how do you go about systematically sharing your surplus? Well, this is no simple answer, but I'll share what works for me. Using some of these tools, like I mentioned, I've adapted them to think about these different zones of influence, right, and of impact that my direct interactions have. On a daily basis, I have a very heavy interaction with my little pet dog, right? And then less often, I might be interacting with political bodies across the planet, or my own country, or my own state, or my own municipality, right? Anyway, so we take a look at, who we're interacting with on all these different levels, and we think about the impacts that we're having. And if we're trying to be a fractal practitioner, one that's conscious of interbeing and therefore accepts a responsibility to one's interactions on each of these scales, then we have a duty to more deeply, as much as we can, and this is a process, this is a learning process, we have a duty to more deeply understand what it is and how we can affect all of these different realms of our very existence, and to take responsibility for the impacts that we're putting into the world at each of these levels. So I might set aside, well, first of all, I might look at what I'm strongest in and what I'm weakest in. For example, I don't feel that lately, I don't feel I've actually been really properly attending to my responsibility to global kin and ecological kin. That is to say, people, societies who are suffering from incredible injustices today. I don't feel that I've done enough in that domain. This is just my own assessment. Lately, I've been really, really pouring a lot of my energy into that community realm, that color band on the prism, let's say. I've been pouring a lot of energy there. In some ways, it's not coming back to me, and so I need to be attentive that I am not creating a degenerative situation where my energy is simply being siphoned from. I need to look carefully at ways that it can be regenerative so that it's coming back to me and it's also multiplying the benefits for others. So that would be my personal assessment in this moment. And then what I would do is look at each of these different color bands in the prism, each of the different zones and realms in which I affect the world, and think about what is my responsibility in these realms and how do I bring my actions, my thoughtful actions, into greater integrity in that domain. And I would assess across all of these different realms to see where I'm weak, to see where I might be, for instance, dissociating from my responsibility, or just, deferring it and not taking responsibility in a certain arena. And then I would put a little bit extra energy there. As a reflection tool, and by the way, I'm a huge fan of reflection tools because they allow us to recalibrate and adjust and adapt our operating schema, meaning our worldview and the way that we move through the world. So I'm a big fan of taking the time for these kinds of awareness practices. So, once we do take the time, set the time aside to really reflect on how we're showing up fractally in the world, we then are empowered with knowledge and action and can just proceed and move forward with that. And then we can always check in again, maybe in a month, maybe in 3 months, and look at how it's gone, and also notice the feedback of what it feels like and whether I'm getting feedback from my actions. When I am sending money to a campaign, do I actually really know or feel the impact of that? Do I ever hear about what the results of my contribution were? So really processing the feedback at each of those levels. And then again, once again, calibrating. So maybe the tactic I chose for how to make an impact in this one way didn't feel quite right. There's maybe a better way to do it. So I'm going to take the time to adjust my tactics and strategies. I'm going to take the time to educate myself. I'm going to take the time to ask somebody that is really strong in this area that I'm in relationship with. I'm going to ask them for feedback. I'm going to ask them for input, right? So in every way, we're looking for opportunities to deepen and enrich our way of being and our way of interacting with the world. And in this way, we become more braided, more connected with the world at every single one of these aspects of us. Ultimately, we feel more whole. We become more whole because we are actively caring for all of the relationships across all of these domains. Now, this is no easy task. Like I said, it is a long journey, and there's no such thing as perfection either. What there is sense making and meaning making. So it is up to you to make meaning from the acts that you are doing, the work that you are doing, and to allow that meaning to shape your life. That is ultimately what we are up to. It's not about a perfect performance or getting 100 on your scorecard of fractal inhabitation of this world. No. We're just alive. We're just humans. We're just messing it up constantly. But if we're not learning and if we're not meaning making, that's where we're failing. If we're not engaging, that's where we're failing. So this is my invitation to you to take some inspiration from what I'm saying and perhaps invent a method or a tool, a technique that works for you to begin to consciously think of and attend to your relations at all scales. Thank you so much for watching and listening. This is the time in our weekly talk when we pass the proverbial tithing basket. If you'd like to support the work of Fractal Praxis, please make a donation using the link below or consider becoming a member at blog.fractalpraxis.com. Hit the subscribe button. Thank you so much. And in closing, I wish you well. Merry meet and merry part and merry meet again.